First Ratchet & Clank, and now not even 2 weeks later we get Crash Bandicoot 4, it's about time. Holy shit it is. Unless you live in Japan. You see, while us western audiences haven't had a numbered Crash game since 3, over in Japan Wrath of Cortex is considered the official 4th game in the series, and even goes further with Twin Sanity known as Crash 5. So before the new game comes out, I thought it'd be a good time to revisit the original Crash 4 before it fades out of our minds almost entirely with this one, which might not be a bad thing depending on who you ask. It's no secret that Wrath of Cortex has by far the most mixed reception out of the entire series. Some people like it, some think it's pretty mediocre, and some people just despise it.
Who wrote this? Who wrote this lie?
Love or hate it though, the game sold quite well, which led to the Platinum release that had slightly improved loading times, but still couldn't even come close to the load times of Crash 3 on PS1. It was also the first game in the series that wasn't exclusive to PlayStation, and the first Crash game that I had ever played, even though I played it on PS2.
Crash Bandicoot, the Wrath of Cortex.
Alright, here we go. Anytime now. Yeah, this right here is one of the most infamous complaints about Wrath of Cortex. It's like the first thing most people think of. Although with that being said, I hadn't played this game in a while and expected the load times to be horrendous, but surprisingly they weren't too bad. Usually my load times would be about 15 seconds on average, which is what I would consider to be bearable at the least. This is coming from the Platinum version of the game, by the way. I can't speak for the original release, but I've heard it can take almost 30 seconds, which is ridiculous for levels that only last for like 3 minutes. The story has never been anything to take seriously in the Crash games prior to this, so it's not worth spending too long looking at it here. Basically, Dr. Cortex creates a new secret weapon that turns out to be Crunch Bandicoot, and Uka Uka awakens the elemental mask that gives Crunch special abilities to use in order to fight Crash. Aku Aku and Coco on the other hand create a portal chamber and get Crash to collect 25 crystal. Yeah, we know where this is going. I think by this point the classic formula of Crash was starting to outstay its welcome, which is why we haven't seen it as much since. The other common complaint about Wrath is that it feels like a soulless copy of 3, which seems pretty true if you take a step back and think about any new mechanics added here. I mean, what is there? A ball? And goddamn sneak shoes? Honestly though, I think the most noteworthy addition was having Coco as a fully playable character, even though she controls just like how Crash did in the original, with no slide or high jump for extra verticality. Which is a shame because the few levels she's in are actually fun to navigate through. Kicking things off with Warp Room 1, there's already a pretty even mix of platforming levels and vehicle levels. In fact, it's kinda similar to Crash 3's. The first stage gives you a standard Crash level while getting you comfortable with the controls and familiar to the different box types. Although anyone who played Tier 3 would have noticed they randomly removed slide spinning, which is a technique used to continue your momentum after sliding instead of coming to a complete stop. I'm sure the speedrunning community was pretty upset about that one. The first Warp Room also introduces a new vehicle to the series, the Atmosphere, and it has probably the best levels for any vehicle in the game, except for the first boss, which is far too easy and gives you the most useless ability in any Crash game that you use in like 2 bonus stages. Honestly though, most of my favourite levels in this game are in Warp Rooms 1 and 2, but once I get to the halfway point, I just feel like not playing anymore. It's not necessarily because the rest of the game is bad majority of the time, but rather mediocre. There's also levels that last way too long, while they also don't feel like much of a step up in terms of challenge. Wrath of Cortex is just the perfect example of a game that has taken a step back from its predecessors and ends up feeling like a cheaper version of 3. It's like they got the basics of what actually makes a Crash game, but didn't fine tune the mechanics that made for the same level of satisfying gameplay that Crash 2 and 3 had. Why is it that when I get a triple mask, Crash's speed stays the same even on those slow as fuck monkey bars? Who thought the submarine was a good idea when its hitbox is massive, forcing you slowly to inch your way through these underwater levels when Crash swimming on his own is faster? Why is it that even though this game got hugely famous actors to voice the elementals, the characters are all bland and have no memorable lines outside of
Leave my levels alone!
Is there a draft in here?
Even worse, but most of the boss fights are just pathetic. There's that water one that takes about less than a minute of doing basic timing and platforming, and then there's the shitty Star Fox one that just goes on and on. I mean, credit where credit is due, the final boss is a decent fight, and I'd say it's definitely more challenging than the original trilogies, but that could be because I haven't played this one as much, I don't know. I went into this game wanting to like it, since I hadn't played it in a while, and looking on the surface, it brought back all of the additions that Crash 3 made with the added benefit of being on a newer console. Despite that though, Wrath of Cortex was never able to reach the same highs of the previous games, and while I think it's unfair to call it a bad game, it's definitely disappointing considering the wasted potential here. If there's one thing though that every Crash fan can agree on, it's that this game has an amazing soundtrack, but unfortunately even that isn't enough to save this game.